Off the top of your head, what's a trilogy that really did everything right? Installments that had a solid beginning and improved with each further entry to just stick the landing, even if it wasn't the end of a series. The only example I can think of is, like, Once Upon a Time in China. Don't know why, that's just what pops into my head. Man, those movies are so cool. So far, Atelier Iris has been faring pretty well. The first game, Eternal Mana, was fairly generic, but decent enough if you're a fan of the series. Azoth of Destiny, on the other hand, is actually a great game in my opinion. Definitely something I'd recommend to fans of RPGs from this console gen. Now we're at the end of the trilogy with Grand Phantasm, which I've actually been looking forward to the most out of these three. See, unlike the previous entries, I have no experience playing this game until now. I'd beaten Eternal Mana and got about 1/3 through Azoth, but I hadn't even opened my copy of Phantasm until now. Could probably keep it sealed to sell more, but I collect to play, so let's pop it open. I am aware of the game's rather, let's say lackluster reputation, but I'm going in with an open mind and giving it a fair shot. I want to see what this finale has to offer. I am so tired. Okay, so Grand Phantasm drastically breaks away from the previous entries in several ways, the most significant of which is the game's structure and plot. Unlike the previous games, which tried to set up some vague intrigue with elements hinting at what's to come, Iris 3 gratefully gives us 87% of the plot synopsis in the first few minutes. In this world, there exists a book of incredible magic power magic called the Grand Librum of Escalario that contains the history of everything. Like everything that has been and presumably will be is in this book. With that comes all the knowledge of magic and alchemy one could ever want. As a result, the book was sealed, the keys to open it were split into 8 pieces, and it was passed down a lineage until it became legend. If a user finds all 8 gems, their greatest wish will be granted. In other words, it's Dragon Ball. This is just Dragon Ball. A short while into the story, our heroes learned the book belonging to Iris is the Escalario and set out on a journey to find all the gems because, hey, free wishes! And that's it. I am not kidding you when I say that's almost the entirety of this game's plot, and that's not the only problem stemming from this game's baffling core decision. See, while the other games were structured like a regular RPG with a simple premise that's given more depth as time goes on, or, you know, that's at least what happened in Iris 2. Iris 3 doesn't share the same gameplay setup, and the plot reflects that. No, rather than another RPG, this game is more akin to a dungeon crawler, so instead of going from town to town and solving issues to progress an ever-evolving narrative, you have one town and a bunch of dungeons to visit in pursuit of finishing quests, which means the entire core narrative of this game is a fetch quest that turns into a race against some random villain. It doesn't even try to set up some kind of intrigue like the previous 2 entries to get you hooked. Once a story has an item as powerful as the Escalario, you know that's going to be all that matters the whole way through, which sure isn't much of a problem so long as the journey reaching that destination is fun, and it really isn't here. In most Atelier games, plot really isn't the focus, so it's fine for them to have a simple premise and spend the adventure developing characters. Even the entries that do have heavier story emphasis tend to focus more on the interactions of the main cast rather than progressing some super deep end goal. But as we've already established, Iris 3 is not like most Atelier games. Kind of. It's really weird. In this game, you play as Edge. Oh, jeez. Yes, this is our hero, everyone. Someone who can give Claim from Eternal Mana a run for his money in the generic JRPG protagonist competition. And is it just me, or does a certain other Edge look just a bit too much like him? I mean, what can I say? He's a JRPG protagonist. According to what the game says, he's a guy that acts cold towards others, but really has a heart of gold and just wants to help people. So he's also a tsundere. Wonderful. No, that's fine. To be fair, that does come across in-game. He doesn't say much and has some comments showing he really does care, but when he says something like this,
I lost my dreams and wishes long ago.
Yeah, there's no way I can think of him as anything more than a 12-year-old's attempt to rip off Ichigo Kurosaki. And if that voice sounds familiar, it's because he's played by Vic Mignogna. Man, does that guy have better credits. Then we have the actual protagonist of the story, Iris. If you've been paying attention to things like my last 2 videos, or, you know, the title of the trilogy, that name should be setting off some light bulb. Aw man, Iris is now a main cast member? That's awesome! Eternal Mana was about exploring her legacy and the impact of her research long after she was gone. Azoth of Destiny showed her origins. This must be taking place between those 2 games when she set out on her own adventures. It'll be so cool to explore the world and see her develop as a character on a more personal level. You're right, that would be cool. There's just one issue. One tiny misstep, one little car crash. This isn't Iris. I mean, she is, but she isn't the same one. I have no idea why they did this, but the Iris that's been involved for the past 2 entries is absolutely nowhere in Iris 3. This Iris is a completely unrelated character with no connection to anything that's happened in the prior games. She just looks like Iris and has the same first name. It would have been a great through line for the trilogy, having one central character and telling stories involving different periods of her life and legacy, but nope. I'm so baffled as to why they decided not to make her the same Iris. It would have made the story a bit more interesting, and they could have had her discover the book instead of it being an heirloom. Or I guess it would be more accurate to say it wouldn't make the story worse because there isn't much in the first place. This Iris is generic JRPG girl. You've seen her kind of character 1,000 times. She's generically nice and friendly, generically shy, and has a generic love interest in the form of her generic bestie Edge. The most standout thing I can remember about her personality is she likes to be shot out of cannons. Although for some reason she was voted the most popular character in the trilogy according to a poll run in Japan a while back. Like, why? And why do characters keep hitting on her? I'm looking at you, creepy library guy, voiced by Patrick Sates. Maybe I just dislike her on the basis of her design looking like a proto-Toturi, which just reminds me of terrible things, but I just can't think of anything appealing or memorable about her. Well, except the canon thing. Oh, and the weird trivia of her being voiced by Michelle Ruff, same as Vize and Azoth of Destiny. Other than that, yeah, I'm not a fan. At least she seems interested in collecting the gems, unlike Mr. Tryhard McCoolguy. The last member of the main cast is Nell, a fellow raider working at the same guild as Edge and Iris. You actually fight her and her sister Eula pretty early on in pursuit of a gem, and she joins your party after falling out with her older sibling. I'll be honest, as much as I don't like this cast, Nell at least has the most coherent motivation. Her family was once rich nobility, but after losing their fortune and status, she and Eula set out as raiders to regain their wealth and return to their former way of life. As time goes on and she learns the power of friendship, she realizes how shallow her way of life was and starts to value her new one. Good on her, she actually has some kind of character arc. She also acts like a 7-year-old, seems to have the brain capacity of one, and dresses like she saw a squirrel outside halfway through her morning routine, but at least she has something going for her. I'll get to the character design soon because... Oh, and she's voiced by Jessica Strauss, who also played Noin in Iris 2. Man, that's just wild. If that wasn't enough, her sister is played by Wendy Lee, the same as Lita from the first game. So this cast is just like a big bunch of coincidences. Yep, that was your last party member. You only have 3 as opposed to 5 from the previous entry. Now, to cut the game some slack, there is a gameplay reason as to why this is the case, but that doesn't stop it from feeling like a lesser effort than Eternal Mana or Azoth. These 3 just aren't very interesting, and despite having the promise of any wish they want, they treat it the same as finding a few coal on the sidewalk. Oh, coal is the series currency, by the way, I never mentioned that. So you combine a paper-thin central plot with a smaller cast of less interesting characters on top of the previously described premise of needing to fulfill side quests to move the plot forward, and it just feels so... empty. Like, nothing really happens in this story. I'm not gonna sit here and proclaim Iris 1 and 2 had Xenogear levels of depth, but at least events were occurring that pushed me to keep going. Meanwhile, Iris 3 has the laziest attempt at raising stakes I've seen in a long time. Get this, about halfway through the plot, the main villain of the game, Crowley, whose main character trait is he's the villain, places a curse on Iris. This curse does not have any adverse effects on gameplay or story aside from Iris coughing in the next cutscene, the horror. And you know what they say the solution is? To continue finding the 8 gems. To keep doing the thing we were already doing and would have continued doing regardless. And what makes it even worse, they try and do it a second time. This game has less stakes than a vegan buffet. I am so tired. Now again, trying to cut it some slack here, maybe they wanted to make the plot less about the central narrative or your main cast and instead flesh out some of the villagers, which to the game's credit, they kind of do. See, in order to reach the next story mission, which is just finding another gem, you need to raise your rank as a raider. Going to the quest board, you find fetch quests and hunting missions, but the important ones are marked with this little green icon. These give you quest points and tend to give you some conversations with clients. There are a few with neat stories behind them, but you just have to wait so long between them since they need you to be a higher rank as the missions progress, so it could take you several chapters to complete one person's arc, which isn't inherently bad, but the villagers just aren't interesting or deep enough to justify spacing their missions out like this. Mayna was my favorite, a raider who partnered with her brother only for him to die while protecting her during a mission. After you finish her request, she learned to accept her grief and continue being a raider for both of their sakes. That was narratively satisfying. It's just a shame it's spread across like 10 hours of padding and busy work. I think it would have been better if each chapter of the story just focused on one villager and let me do all their quests in one go, rather than spacing them so far apart. This really is the biggest issue with Iris 3. The fact it's a dungeon crawler means every mission you take on requires you to visit the dungeons for something, whether it be an item or fighting a certain monster. There are a total of 5 dungeons in the whole game: the Ancient Forest, Castle Grimoire, Posporia Battlefields, Crystal Valley, and Grand Gardens. You have to visit them dozens of times each over the course of the story, going through the same vistas every time. There are no shortcuts or alternate entrances, and they don't change much as you unlock new areas, so they all feel so stale before too long. Basically, do you remember the Temple of the Ocean King from Phantom Hourglass? Well, this game is basically 5 of those, including the stupid time limit. Why? If you don't want me spending so much time in the dungeon, maybe you should give me something else to do, Grand Phantasm. With the green character missions so heavily outnumbered by the actual side quest, you don't even get much context for why you're doing them. You just go to the dungeons because everything's there, apparently. The dungeons are the solution to all life's problems. Need a specific fish? Go to the dungeon. Monsters causing problems for little bear people? Go to the dungeon. Trying to collect old RPGs physically in the current state of the secondary market? Man, I wish there was a dungeon for that. Because the vast majority of this game is spent on doing busy work missions, it just gets so boring. Without a good central narrative to keep me engaged or a cast of likable characters adding charm to the proceedings, it's just so hard to care about going back to the same forest for the 27th time. So yeah, the story of Iris 3, kind of a wash. Nothing really happens. Maybe I'm just speaking from a place of ignorance because dungeon crawlers aren't a genre I'm familiar with, but there's nothing about this game that makes the task anything more than sheer tedium. There's such little happening in the story, I didn't even record a lot of my playthrough because I knew nothing would happen, and I haven't needed to do that for any game until now. What makes it worse is, I was right. I didn't record nearly a third of my playthrough, and aside from one clip being corrupted due to my computer suddenly crashing, which really stinks, I didn't miss anything worth showing. I know this subgenre isn't the best when it comes to exciting or eventful playthroughs, but if I could ignore 1/3 of the game and not feel like I missed anything noteworthy, that's a big problem. It just doesn't have enough going on to justify its runtime, in my opinion. But hey, maybe that's because they shifted their focus to the gameplay, so how is it? Well, it's fine. Again, the gameplay boils down to exploring the dungeons and finishing quests, and it's functional. Like, it's insanely repetitive because the dungeons themselves are super tedious to navigate and there are only 5, but at least it works as intended, I think. I was actually wondering if lack of variety is a fair criticism against the game, since later entries like, say, Rorona have a small handful of places to explore, and that game is great. I've actually been playing Rorona in my off time, and the small number of environments doesn't bother me at all. I think the main difference is how in Rorona, you just skim over the locations for gathering points and don't spend much time in them. You can get in and out in no time flat. So returning to those spots over and over isn't a big issue since the focus is just finding alchemy ingredients for synthesis. In contrast, the dungeons in Iris 3 are much bigger, only have one entrance, so reaching certain locations can take quite a while, and the focus is very clearly on combat, which is already a risky move in an old school RPG. The combat in Iris 3 is kind of like a slightly altered version of Azoth of Destinies. Turn-based combat with no individual MP, instead using a chargeable skill gauge for, well, skills. However, instead of the free-flowing time gauge from Azoth, you have what they call the active cost card system, which shows the exact turn order and gives you more direct info on the flow of battle, so it's fine. You know, it's alright, and it will be featured in later games, so it's not that bad. Because you no longer have the ability to knock enemy turns back, you just have one attack, which really removes the decision making from having both break and charge attacks from Azoth, so that's pretty lame. You also hold on to whatever remaining charge you have at the end of battle instead of resetting it every fight, which I actually kind of like since it means you can go into battle able to use skills. You also generate charge walking around, which I could do without, but it's alright for saving you some time charging the gauge. If the emphasis of your RPG is lots of combat, you need a strong battle system, like Legend of Legaia. This is not like Legaia. The basis of combat is just okay, but it contains the absolute best part of the game, an aspect I think more people need to utilize because it is legitimately great. The blade system. See, unlike a certain other game with an identically named mechanic, this isn't an entirely pointless and stupid gacha system with no real justification for its inclusion besides inflating playtime through RNG. I'm not bitter. It's actually this game's version of a job system. Like I said before, you only have 3 party members, Iris, Edge, and Nell, but as you play, you'll partner with different mana spirits to give them all new forms. These are the blades, and both Edge and Nell gain 4 unique ones over the course of the game. They each have different skills, stats, weapon types, and entirely new sprites. Unless they're recolors, which is really disappointing, but whatever. So in reality, you have 11 possible party members. It would be even better if both Edge and Nell could equip any mana, but I guess that's asking for too much. This system is fantastic in concept, and mixing around the blades you take into battle adds a lot to keeping the combat engaging. At least it is for a little bit, considering how much combat there is in this game. Iris can't equip blades, but she can summon the spirits for super attacks, and unlike other games with summoning mechanics, I actually found myself using them quite regularly, because Iris doesn't really do much else. This feature alone is something I would love to see brought back in some way. Maybe not in Atelier, since mana spirits haven't been a thing since Mana Chemia 2, but it'd be great to see it implemented somewhere. The only game I could think of that's done something kind of similar is like Mega Man Battle Network style change. Unfortunately, because this is Atelier Iris 3, there's one kind of huge problem with it. The spirits are very unbalanced. Meet Plua, the Dark Mana. She's the very first one you get in the game. She's also the best blade by a country mile, and it all has to do with this new meter down here. This is the burst meter, and when it fills up, all enemies become broken so they can't act and take guaranteed critical damage, the power of skills is increased, and your skill meter fills up to 9. In other words, here's the combat, and here's the burst meter. Yeah, this thing is flat out broken and the go-to strategy for every encounter. So why does this make the Dark Blade so great specifically? Well, different weapons can hit enemies a different number of times, and the Dark Blade's weapons have the highest number of hits for any form. Its gimmick is also having lower attack for insanely high speed, which means not only do you normally act first, but you also have a lower wait time for your next turn. So filling up the burst meter is very easy to do. If that wasn't enough, its skills are insane. One lets you make a shadow clone for an extra turn, one fills up the burst meter halfway on its own, and then there's the skill that absolutely breaks this game like a precariously placed glass near the average house cat, Blink Attack. This lets you hit one enemy pretty hard for 2 stocks of the skill meter, and then immediately take another turn. And in burst mode, you get 9 stocks. So do the math. 1, 2, 3, 4, knockout! Oh, and if that wasn't enough, it also has the chance to just dodge out of attacks with substitution. This thing is so strong, it's not even funny. This doesn't mean the remaining blades are useless, they all have some kind of neat tricks to try out, it's just the Dark Blade is... yeah, that thing's amazing, even if it turns Edge into even more of a dorky tryhard. The Water Blade is, you guessed it, the support specialist. Nell gets really high magic and the ability to boost stats along with a great recovery skill and healing echo. It only has 1 attack skill, but it's pretty solid. Or should I say, liquid. The Poison Blade is kind of like a tank necromancer, having high attack and defense for low speed, but with the special skill of summoning different monsters. It's kind of neat, but I didn't use it all that much because I just like how the other ones play more. The Stone Blade is by far Nell's best offensive form, having heavy hitting skills with a wide range, even including a huge party-wide attack where she rides a giant rocket lance. That's pretty cool. The Evil Blade is actually kind of funny. It gives Edge this ridiculous updo and winged armor, and when he's low on health, he puts a hand on his hip like a brooding teenager. It's a really weird class though, since it has decent stats and everything except speed, and despite being the Evil Blade, it's one of the few forms with built-in healing skills. Like, why? It's fine enough, but kind of underwhelming, kind of like a red mage. Sound is super interesting, and one of the 2 optional blades you can find. It lets you control monsters for mob attacks, from Trick or Treat, letting you turn enemies into candy, summoning a bunch of kobolds to steal items, or just one huge kobold to smack everything. It's pretty great, definitely one of the better blades. The illusion blade is apparently the worst one, but I think it's kinda neat. It doesn't have very high speed, but its attack and magic are decent, and its gimmick is just having really odd skills, such as Mug, where you literally shake down an enemy for money. Okay, that's kind of funny. Also, the sprite's cute. It's like an Easter costume. Finally, we have the time mana. The time mana? The mana of ties, the semi-magical embodiment of formal neckwear. No, this is the mana of time, and its edge is only magic-focused blade. It's actually pretty cool. It gives him a wider range of skills with magic gained from accessories, but its built-in skills are neat, although I didn't get to use it much in my playthrough. Overall, a pretty diverse range of different forms to experiment with. This is Iris 3's biggest strength, the variety of party combos you can make with different blade forms. Although for some reason it isn't mentioned anywhere on the box. Might as well, guys, not like anything else on this box is very interesting. By itself, the combat is fine, but add in the blade system and it becomes genuinely fantastic. Sometimes. The boss fights are usually pretty good, my favorite being the Shadow Spectre you need to find to obtain the time mana. When these moments happen and you're given a good challenge in combat, it shows what makes Iris 3 good. It's just a shame these moments are buried under the sheer tedium of everything else. If the game trimmed out the busy work and focused up the narrative scope, this could have been a good follow-up to Azoth of Destiny, but by changing the core structure to be more about combat and side quest, it just makes the experience so insanely dull. It almost reminds me of a mobile game taking a cool concept and fun customization and just piling on a bunch of uninteresting quests that get harder to complete as it goes on, so it wastes even more of your time. Except you can't pay to speed things up here, you have to grind everything out, so what few great things the game has lose their appeal long before the credits roll. I am so tired. The next best thing to the blade system is the presentation. Sure, it's still isometric and sprite-based, but they definitely put more effort into the visuals this time. Most noticeably, each dungeon entrance has this cool screen that shrinks your sprite as you approach it, giving the illusion of depth. Castle Grimoire in particular is just, oh man, it looks awesome. I won't lie, that looks pretty great. Environments have more layers to them, with elements appearing in the foreground, and there's more detail put into the surroundings. Sometimes it's kind of annoying, like in Crystal Valley, where everything is so crystally, kind of a mess to look at, but for the most part the visuals are appreciated. Sprites have also been polished up in comparison, the battle animations especially. They even alter some animations and cutscenes depending on your blade. That's a cool detail. Although for some reason they didn't bring back the cool full anime cutscenes from 2. Why was that the only entry to have those? I thought they were really neat. And the soundtrack, it got repetitive because I heard the same things a lot, but listening to it on its own, I think it's a little bit stronger than 2's. Grand Phantasm probably has the best overall presentation of the trilogy. Except the character designs, they're really bad. Okay, so I didn't really bring this up in the last 2 videos, but the character designs were fine. Nothing outstanding, nothing really on par with later games, just passable. But Iris 3 reminds me of Xenoblade Chronicles 2 at times, and that's really not a good thing. Let's get this out of the way. There is so much cleavage in this game. There aren't a ton of portraits, but at least half the female characters look like they're trying to outdo each other's impressions of the San Andreas Fault. It's so dumb. Nell looks halfway to flashing someone. Like, what is this outfit supposed to be? Eula isn't much better, and maybe it's just me, but Iris's outfit doesn't seem to fit her personality. Then there's Ava. Jeez, forget a boob window, this is a flat-out boob greenhouse. It just feels so lazy, like they were looking for an easier way to sell the game, so they just went, hey, you like anime boobs? We got anime boobs right here. If you looked at the screen because I started talking about boobs and cleavage, you are now obligated to subscribe. Apparently that's a rule, I had no idea. Why stop at them? Make Edge's itty bitty teeny tiny titty window bigger until it reaches his stomach, that'd be great. But hey, Pamela's here. It's a small victory, but it's always nice to see her. And she has a little sub-story about this researcher having a crush on her. That was cute. Oh, and alchemy? Yeah, it's here. It's the least significant it's felt in the whole trilogy, but it has some neat ideas. First off, there's only one kind of synthesis. They took out mana and weapon synthesis, so all you have is the cauldron. I don't have much more to say about it than I said about alchemy in Iris 2. The best thing it adds is the ability to choose traits to carry over. That's actually a nice addition, and upgrading equipment with different traits is cool, which is really the majority of what alchemy is used for, just making yourself new equipment. Healing items are also what I made most, along with quest quest required items, but the attack items feel so underpowered compared to your party's skills, so I never found much use in them. You get new recipes from, you guessed it, completing quests for the guild, but Iris will also come up with some after finding certain items in the world. Cute idea, not much else to say, it's just okay. And that's Iris 3! Maybe don't. Stinks to finally play this game with an open mind after all these years just to end up so disappointed and tired. This might actually be my least favorite game in the series, and that stings considering how much I enjoyed Iris 2. This just doesn't feel like an Atelier game. It feels more like the devs were working on an entirely separate title and were told to change it to the third Iris game halfway through. The total shift in structure, the disconnected plot, the heavier emphasis on combat, the absolute lack of a good story, a cast I really don't care about, the lack of importance of alchemy in the grand scheme of things. But it is an Atelier game, and it's definitely the worst one I've played. I feel like it might still have an audience because the combat is legitimately good in places, but I don't think I can recommend it if you're looking for a good RPG. Just super disappointing. I can see why there's no Iris 4. And with that, we conclude the Atelier Iris trilogy, and it's been a strange journey indeed. We went from something middle of the road to something pretty good, and then a confused slog that almost feels like a different series entirely. Azoth of Destiny is still the best in my eyes, totally worth a playthrough regardless of the other entries. Eternal Mana isn't super noteworthy, but it's a decent enough romp if you're in the mood. Grand Phantasm? I didn't even finish it. I got to chapter 8 and I just couldn't anymore. But still, thank you to everyone that subscribed from this little marathon. It means a lot to finally start this long trek. I won't jump right back into the series just yet. The next mainline titles would be Manichemia, and I want to take my time with those. So I guess that means Annie is the next one on the docket. That'll be neat. We also have the Marie remake in July, which I will definitely cover. Looking forward to that. For now, though, I definitely want to take a break and tackle other games. Now, where did I put my... I am so tired.